Welcome back to WiDHiD Game Audio. This week, we're working with interactive music. When you're playing a video game and something important happens, like you discover an important room or location, or a giant portal opens in the middle of the room, then you want to be able to show off the significance of these events with both video and audio. These sudden audio events are known as stingers. In this video, we will be working with two examples of stingers. A single event stinger, where a player discovers a cool artifact, and once they walk into a specific part of the room, they'll hear a little jingle, and a multi-event stinger, where the player walks in front of a barrier, and an epic swell starts to play, and the barrier suddenly disappears with an epic booming sound, followed by a music track rising in the background. We'll be doing all of this with music playlist containers, trigger game syncs, and finally utilizing event functions other than the play function, like stop, trigger, and mute and unmute. Ready? Let's get started. Things done with the game audio. Before we get started, we need to get a sense of what sound assets we'll need for our project. When we approached the barrier, we heard a large swell, some clock ticking sounds, and finally, an impact. As the impact faded out, we heard the cave music come in from the background. Then finally, we heard a little jingle when we approached the sphere in the back of the room. That's our 5 assets. So for the cave music, I have 2 pianos playing along with a sort of string choir type pad. The pianos are from the giant sound set, and the pad is from the ethereal earth sound set, both of which are by native instruments. The swell, impact, and room discovery jingle were all made from Heaviosity's Evolved Mutations 2, and finally, the clock ticking sounds were made from Orchestra 2 by Sample Logic. In this first section, we're going to learn how to have a stinger briefly overshadow a music track. The player moves into a room, sees an artifact, then a jingle is played, showing off the importance of this artifact. First, make a cave music playlist container. In the interactive music hierarchy, I'm going to import 2 audio files, my cave music and my room discovery jingle. Now notice that I am very particular about how I named this track. This track states that it is 160 beats per minute, in a 4/4 time signature, and is 31 bars long. The P0 simply means that there is no pre-entry, which will not be included in this episode. Move the cave music into the music playlist container. Change the cave music playlist container's tempo to 160. Now hit F10 to go into the interactive music layout. Move the cave theme into the bottom area, the music playlist editor. Keep it as sequence continuous and change the loop count to infinite by hitting the down arrow once. Now go to the cave theme music track and head down to the wavelength on the bottom. Keep the start cue on bar 1, that's correct, but go to the end of your track. Remember, our track is 31 bars long, but the exit cue is way further back. So take the red line and move it to bar 31 so that it's properly aligned. There we go, now it will loop properly. Head over to the Game Syncs tab and make a trigger. I'm going to name mine Room Discovery. Go back to the Audio tab and go into the Cave Music playlist container. Go to the Stingers tab, hit the double right arrow button and add the Room Discovery trigger. Change the segment to play to Stinger Room Discovery, and change the play at to next beat. This will ensure that the stinger only plays at a rhythmically reasonable part of the music, and not right when the stinger is triggered. Now make 2 new events, name them Play Music and Trigger Room Discovery. Have them play the cave theme, and trigger the Trigger Room Discovery respectively. In the Trigger Room Discovery event, change the scope to global. Now from this screen, there is no easy way to play the cave theme, then trigger our stinger, especially with all of the other stingers we're adding in the next part. So we're going to use what's known as a Soundcaster session so we can easily test all of our new sounds. Hit F8 to go into the mixer layout. In the Soundcaster area, make a new Soundcaster. The name doesn't matter since you're using it for your own testing purposes. Once you make that, add the Play Music and Trigger Room Discovery events. Now hit play on Play Music and it'll play the music. Then, whenever you like, hit play on Trigger Room Discovery and it will play your jingle. That sounds okay, but the music is still fairly loud and drowns out our stinger. However, there is a quick way to rectify this. Hit F5 to go back to our default layout. Go into the Trigger Room Discovery event and add a mute event and an unmute event. Drag in the cave theme music track into both of these events. If we kept it like this, the music would simply mute and unmute within a single frame. We don't want either of these to happen. We want the volume to gradually go down while we play the stinger, then when the stinger ends, we want the volume to gradually go back up. So go into mute and change the fade time to 1. This will give us a nice fade out. Then go into unmute and change the delay to 3, which will give the stinger plenty of time to play before the unmute takes place. Then change the fade time to 3 so that the music gradually fades back in. That should sound much better. Hit F8, go back to your Soundcaster, and hit play on your music. Then hit play on your trigger. Now we're going to trigger multiple stingers and utilize multiple events for a single situation. The player is going to start with no music and walk up to a barrier. Then a swell is going to occur followed by a big impact when the barrier disappears, revealing a large cave. Following the impact, our cave music is slowly going to fade in. Here's how we do that. I'm going to import 2 audio files, a swell stinger and an impact stinger. I also need a silence audio file. But realistically, I can use any of my current audio files to make silence. Might as well utilize assets I already have. I'm going to copy and paste my cave theme and rename it Silence. In my interactive music layout, I'm going to take the red line, or my track's voice volume, and move it down to the bottom on both ends of the track. Now this track is entirely silent and will serve our purposes perfectly. Go to Game Syncs and we're going to add 2 more triggers, Door Open Imp and Door Open Sequence. Go back to audio, then to our silence music track. Go to the Stingers tab and add both the Door Open Sequence trigger and Door Open Impact trigger. Have the Sequence trigger play the Stinger Swell audio, and have the Impact trigger play the Stinger Impact audio. Now go to your Event tab and make 3 new events, Play Silence, Trigger Impact, and Trigger Swell. In the Play Silence event, have it play the Silence music track. In the Trigger Swell event, have it trigger the Door Open Sequence trigger. Now for something a little more complicated. In the Trigger Impact event, we're going to add 4 objects. First, add a stop event and have it stop the Stinger Swell music track. This way, when the impact happens, the swell stops immediately. Then, we're going to trigger our Door Open Impact trigger. Following that, our cave music is going to slowly fade in. So add a play event and have it play the cave music playlist container. Then finally, we're going to stop the silence music track. We no longer need it. Now we need to make 2 little adjustments to ensure this all plays correctly. In the play cave music action, change the delay to 5 and the fade time to 3. Then in the stop silence action, change the delay to 10 and the fade time to 5. Now just for fun, I'm going to add one more thing, a ticking clock sound that helps us transition from the swell to the big impact. So I'm going to make a sequence container, name it clock, and import my clock sound effects into the sequence container. I'll splice it into 2 audio files, a ticking sound and a talking sound, and add both sounds to the clock sequence containers playlist. Then I'm going to make an event to play the clock sequence containers. And that's all of it. Now all we need to do is test it, so we're going to use our Soundcaster session. Hit F8, then in our Soundcaster session, add our 4 new events. Play silence, trigger swell, trigger impact, and play clock. Now we'll test it, starting with play silence. Now we'll play the swell. Put in a few clock sounds. And finally, the impact, which is going to transition into arcade theme music. That sounds pretty nice. Hit F7 and add our 4 new events into the main sound bank. Generate the sound bank and save your Wwise project. Now let's head over to Unity. The process of integrating music and stingers into Unity is extremely simple, only utilizing the post-event script throughout this entire section. First, make yourself a nice map. I made this one using the MCS Caves and Overhangs asset by Nathaniel Dalderson. Finished with the textures and materials from the Relief Terrain Pack version 3.3 by Tomasz Dobierski. Also, I am using the first-person controller from the standard assets for Unity 2018.4 by Unity Technologies. Now let's integrate our Wwise assets. Head into the Wwise global object and add an AK bank. Leave it as loading on start and have it start the main sound bank. Then, head into the first person character and add an AK audio listener. After that, we're going to add an AK event, the play silence event, so that our silence track can play right at the beginning of the game. Now, I'm going to move over to this colorful barrier over here. This is where we're going to set our swell and impact stingers. A box collider has already been placed in front of this barrier along with the door open script. I'm going to open that up to find that most of the work has already been done for me. The basic process is that when the player enters the trigger, it'll play our swell, then start our wait coroutine. The coroutine is going to wait for 1 second, uptick a counter, and then bring us down to this clock ticking function. It'll play the clock ticking sound that we made, then jump back to the wait coroutine. It's going to loop like that 5 times, as shown in the if statement if clock count is not equal to 5. When it is equal to 5, we'll go to the else statement and these 2 objects, which are the barriers, will disappear and our impact will be triggered. Thankfully, this scripter was nice enough to leave us little comments on where the audio files should go, so now we just need to replace the comments with our scripts. Where it says start music swell, replace it with aksoundengine.postEvent trigger swell player. We're going to do the exact same thing with the clock ticking sounds comment. Replace it with aksoundengine.postEvent play clock player. And finally, one more time. Replace the final comment with aksoundengine.postEvent trigger impact player. And that's all there is to it with this script. If you want the full script, there will be a link to it in the reference Google Doc, which is linked in the description. Save the script, and we're going to move on to the next area. Inside of the cave lies a mysterious sphere, which is of great interest to the player. When they draw near it, a little jingle will play, our little location discovery jingle. So in order to do that, we need to make a trigger much like the trigger in front of the barrier. Make a new cube object, name it location discovery trigger, and expand it into a location next to the sphere where the player has to make contact with it before passing the sphere. Disable the mesh renderer and make sure to hit the is trigger checkbox in the box collider. Now we're going to make a new script in our new object, room discovery. Inside of our script, we're going to get rid of both of the start and update functions, and we're going to make a new variable, private bool scene complete equals false. We only want this jingle to trigger once when we enter this area, so after it's finished, this bool will ensure that it doesn't trigger a second time. Now we're going to make a private void on trigger enter collider other function. Then we'll make an if statement. If scene complete is equal to false, then we're going to post our jingle event, aksoundengine.postEvent trigger room discovery, and then on the other game object, which is us, the player. Finally, all we have to do is set the variable scene complete to true, so that this script does not play again. And that's it. Let's test all of this out. And that's it for this video. If you're happy with what you saw and want to see more in the future, please subscribe to this channel and hit the bell in order to be alerted to future episodes. Check out the Google Doc below for reference material that was used in researching this video so you can broaden your knowledge or hopefully clarify something that wasn't quite clear in this video. Have any questions, comments, or suggestions for me? Feel free to compose a comment below or message me at my Twitter @CaraComposer. This video series is driven by community support, so if there's something you would like to see in a future video, whether it be a specific topic or using a platform other than Unity and Wwise, do not be afraid to ask. Otherwise, I'll see you all next Thursday.